Good morning. It is my first time in Miramichi, so I'm glad to be here. I was actually down the road a few years ago in Bucktouche. I arrived to a nor'easter, my first nor'easter, and I spent 2 days in a B&B eating all my meals at a gas station because every restaurant was closed. So it's been a much more pleasant trip this time. I'm going to assume most of you have not heard me speak. My name's Brett. I come from Ajax. Ajax is about 45 minutes east of the city of Toronto in Ontario. Oh, got to push that thing in before. I was actually at a junior high conference once, and I rolled off the stage, like literally off, feet up. What am I talking about? My background's actually education. I was a high school phys ed chemistry teacher trained, spent most of my career teaching rotary science to grade 7s and 8s. Left that 15 years ago as this became a full-time job, and I do nothing now other than travel and speak on issues I often just say that I think we've forgotten to talk about. I speak on mental health, I speak on parenting, I speak on sex. We do need to look at how we can help us and our kids get a biblical worldview of healthy sexuality. I speak on pornography, dating, media. This is my family, my wife Dawn and my kids Zoe and Ben. Now picture is now 7 years old. Zoe's now in grade 12, Ben's now in grade 11. But I put up this picture because it's my favorite photo of my family, but it's a lie. I'm this far away from having a panic attack, and I didn't tell anyone. I just smiled, like most of us do. We just smile and continue on with our day. My life changed March 1st, 2012. When I left teaching, I did a program called the Arrow Leadership Program. Went straight from Arrow to doing a master's degree in Chicago, and suddenly found myself speaking upwards of 300 speaking dates a year to pay for it. I began to not do well. You can't sustain a life like that. And the day I graduated, I actually began to go downhill very quickly. I found myself almost passing out at speaking events, which is why I'm sitting now. I had my first panic attack at an event. 1,200 people from the Christian Reformed denomination came to hear me speak, and fight or flight, I fled. Can you picture, like, welcome Brett Ullman as you hear my car drive off into the distance? And one morning I was on tour, and I found myself crying in my car. And I'm like, I'm not okay. And ups and downs all kind of ended when I was at a camp, and that day my breakdown kind of really happened. I didn't leave the cottage for the week, didn't leave my house for 5 months, and didn't work for a year. There's irony to my journey in that I'm someone who speaks on mental health, who still to this day struggles with mental health. This morning, I would encourage you to be a good learner, not just a good listener. I think we're great listeners. We listen, we nod, once in a while you hear an amen, but be a good learner, meaning that somehow take something from this talk and take it back to your life, your faith, your practice, the things that we do. You can take notes physically or digitally. You can take pictures of any slide that you want. And this little take-home button is a button, if you see it on any slide, it means whatever's on the slide, I've linked for you directly on my website. And so I'll show you where that is at the end of the talk, and you can go back and engage with any of those things later if you'd like to. Some quick ground rules. Number one, I think we need to get this done right, mental health, and I think often we're not. So for some of us, this is just kind of a readjustment of language or things we do, or for some of us who are struggling, some ways we move forward. I do come from a faith perspective. I grew up Baptist. I married a Pentecostal. I do know that's not supposed to happen. We now go to a church called Sanctus, which used to be called C4. It's a church just in Ajax. And statistics, I'm going to give you a whole bunch, but they're all wrong. Because statistics are just a snapshot of a time and a place in the world that doesn't exist anymore. So when people come up after and say, Brett, you said the statistic is 80%, I think it's 85%. I will say to you gracefully, I just don't care. It's the same, right? It's a lot, it's a little, or it's in the middle. And here's the most important one. I just need you to trust me for 40 minutes. I don't have any weird ideologies for you. We're just looking at how do we connect our ancient faith with our modern world with a really tough conversation. So I found myself as a leader, as a speaker, suddenly at home, and I'm trapped. I'm not leaving my house. When I do, my hands would shake, and in began to come my friends and other leaders. Each of them would come, and they would sit across from me on a chair or a couch, and to quote the book of Job, they became Job's friends. Each of them would say, after pleasantries, questions or comments like, well, hey, have you tried? And then they would give me something. Often the first one was, have you tried Jesus? And I would say, what do you mean by that? And they're like, Jesus. And I'm like, yeah, I know Jesus. What do you mean by have I tried Jesus? Like it was something I was missing, like it's a chocolate bar I'm supposed to take. And they would say, isn't that what I'm supposed to say to you? And I would say, I don't know. And they would leave. And the next person would say, have you tried these milkshakes? And I'm like, what? Like, what do we talk, like, but it's not like regular milkshakes. It's these healthy milkshakes. And the next guy would say, have you tried running? And I'm like, I haven't left the house in 5 months. No. But it was this never-ending ideas. And my wife came to me about 5 months in, and she said to me, we need to talk. Now, it wasn't a conversation that I expected. She actually was worried I was going to take my life. And so we had a long talk, and she said to me, you need to create or you're going to die. And she called me a creative. And I think a musician's a creative, an artist is a creative. And she said, well, you're a weird creative. She said, you take very complex things and bring them down into like very manageable things. And she said, what would you do if you ever spoke again? And I said, I'd love to help people have a process or have some quick understanding that, like, what do you do if you're struggling with anxiety? How do we have an answer that's both biblical but practical? And those words cannot be oxymorons. We have to be biblical and practical. And that's where the basis of this talk came to be. So this morning, we're going to do 4 things. We're going to look at anxiety and depression. And I will say this, I fully acknowledge there's so much more to mental health. From OCD to dyslexia to bipolar to schizophrenia, the list goes on. But we don't have time for all of it. But I think this is some of the main kind of root, and probably panic is part of this. First steps, what do you do to get help? How our faith plays a role, where is God in this journey? Some thoughts, some practical thoughts, and then we're done. And when I say we're done, I really hope we're not. I hope this kind of sparks conversation amongst you as a church, amongst you at work and in your families and different things. So depression and anxiety, I don't know if we even have good definitions of this. There isn't a day in my life when someone doesn't say on social media something like, oh, I'm so depressed. And you're like, oh, did you have a bad day? Because that's the vernacular of the day. That's the words that we use. But does it mean you are depressed? I would say no. But if depression is a continuum from someone who's well to someone with clinical depression at home, what about everything in the middle? Where does seasonal affective disorder land? Because we're all starting to feel that. Did you feel that a few weeks ago when suddenly it's dark and it's snowy and we all kind of go, ugh, like we're in for another long winter? And then do you realize, like, suddenly in the spring, there's the first day that's 19 degrees. We all walk outside. Everyone is smiling. Like, it affects us. Is that depression? Sure it is. Is it clinical depression? No. How about if you've had a deep loss in your family, death, long-term sickness, other things? How about you just feel blah and you don't know why? Well, they're all parts of depression, but where do they fit in a continuum? And the same is with anxiety. There is people who are well, and there's someone with such social anxiety that they're actually not here today. Hopefully they're watching online, but some people just couldn't come. Maybe as parents, we worry about our children. We worry about, who they'll date, who they'll marry. You worry about where you'll go to school and all these things. How did these things, depression and anxiety, manifest physiologically in my life? Everything from sweating for no reason, fog over my life, couldn't think, couldn't read, hopelessness, worthlessness, panic attacks, hot flushes, fear, and the bane of my existence is not sleeping. I've not slept through the night since March 1st, 2012. I'm up every sleep cycle, every night. And if you struggle with sleep, you understand, like, sleeplessness causes anxiety. Anxiety causes, it ends up being this rut you just cannot break out of. Last night I was up, I think, 7 times. So if we're going to give statistics, here's a bunch. I'd rather do this statistic. How many of you, by a quick show of hands, and please do this at the sites as well, how many of you, by a quick show of hands, know someone who struggles with mental health in any way, shape, and form? Quick show of hands. And the truth is, the stats are well over 95+%. There's a really good quote that says this: people have taken to exaggerating their everyday experiences and punctuating sentences with terminology appropriate for a psychiatrist's office. They aren't nervous about an upcoming work presentation. They have bad anxiety. They aren't uncomfortable to go to a big party where they don't know anyone. They have social anxiety. And they don't get butterflies in their stomach. They have panic attacks. Anxiety isn't cute or fashionable. It's not just some word we can overuse to death. It's a debilitating disorder that 40 to 60 million people struggle with in North America. Now, everyone deserves to be taken seriously. So for some of you who are working and have to go to a Christmas party in a few weeks, maybe we just don't use the term social anxiety. Maybe we use different terms and we look at how we can help you in those environments. But maybe we need to separate language that's mental health and other things that are just normal. Somebody emailed me a metaphor for depression. You're stuck in a deep, dark hole in the ground. The walls are completely smooth and you don't have anything to help you get out. Most people just walk past the hole. Isn't that sad? But occasionally someone stops at the top, looks down and asks, what's wrong? You tell them you're stuck in this hole and you can't get out, and they're like, so just climb up. And you look all around, and all you can say is, I can't. And they say, sure you can. And they walk away. This was my journey in the church world. And this is not okay. It's not okay we sing and we talk about, mercy and grace and compassion and community, but then when life goes off, we don't have that. Now, I would encourage all of you not to be, to quote the old nursery rhyme, sky is falling people. When emails and social media goes around talking about how all mental health today is blamed on smartphones, please just hit delete. When anyone says all, I just click delete. It's a spoke on a wheel, but it's not the wheel. There's all kinds of issues with social media. But what about poor diet, lack of sleep? Even dopamine, we're trying to figure out what's going on. For every one of you with your phone in your pocket right now, every time your phone buzzes throughout the service, you get a dopamine to your brain. Every time my Apple Watch taps me when a hockey score happens, every time anything, it's the pleasure drug. It's like getting a hug or a kiss. But what happens when a human being gets 1 million, 2 million, 5 million dopamine hits? We don't know. But we're seeing really negative things. We're seeing a 25 to 40% increase in mental health in the last number of years. But what about things like predisposition, just genetics, trauma, burnout, breakdown, isolation, loneliness? How about having sickness? Or how about just the idea of substance abuse? There's so many things that can be put into this category. I think we as Canadians began to talk about mental health when Maclean's magazine did a poll. They polled 1,600 students at University of Alberta, U of A. It's in Edmonton. It's called The Campus Crisis, The Broken Generation. And these are staggering statistics. How many felt exhausted but not from physical activity? 87. Very sad, 66. So depressed it's difficult to function, over a third. Overwhelming anxiety, not just anxiety, overwhelming, over half of the students. They made a premise, maybe it's just U of A. I always just say maybe the Edmonton Oilers hockey team is just so bad. Don't make that joke in Edmonton. They don't find it funny, just to let you know. They made a premise so they could pull more people. That's the only reason they did it. And they pulled every college and university in all of Canada. And every statistic went up, just a little bit. And I put forth, it's right here today. And when I fly home and go to my church, it's every church and school and business in between and going all the way from this coast to the other coast. Now, I don't have time today to walk through everything, so I've given you online a bunch of viral videos and Claire Hughes, the Olympian, her trip across the country on mental health, and 2 programs on panic. And if you don't know panic attacks like taking a grenade and it explodes inside you, but it's emotions. Now, Panic Away, in their ebook that I bought, says one line. It just says, anxiety is just feelings. They're just feelings. They're misplaced feelings, but they're just feelings. You want those feelings on a roller coaster watching a scary movie. You don't want them right now just sitting in church. Later when you're having lunch or doing homework or back to work, whenever. Now, I would put forth that we give a different set of rules for people with mental health than we do with other things. Look at the first comic. The person's throwing up in a toilet. Have you tried, not having the flu? I stopped counting at 1,000 emails from people who said to me, have you tried, not having anxiety? 1,000. Number 2, it's like you're not even trying to stop bleeding. And the third one looks a little weird. It's a person giving themselves an insulin shot for diabetes. I don't think it's healthy you have to take medication every day just to feel normal. Don't you worry it's changing you from who you really are? Said no one ever to someone with anything else except for mental health. I just think if we want to start somewhere, we start from a place where we all can look at getting hope and healing. Now, you might have noticed I'm not a preacher. I think I'm a teacher. Now, I can argue teaching preaches and preaching teaches, another conversation. But I'm a researcher, and I've read 240 books on mental health. I've talked to tens of thousands of people, counselors, all these people. But the number one thing I still get messaged is this: Brett, I love Jesus. What about medicine? Well, let's just deal with it. Now, everything except for the bottom one are things that no one seems to care. If you need to take an inhaler now, you take it. We say take it, breathe deep. But the moment we hit down to depression and anti-anxiety, welcome to the polarization of society. It's like politics, it's like Don Cherry conversations this week. Everything is this or it's that. And you might say, well, what are you with medications? Well, there's this side of medications. One guy said to me, meds are always good. And I'm like, are you a drug dealer? No. No one wants someone to be on meds. And the other side, someone said to me, oh, meds are always bad. And I would say I'm in the middle. The world's not black and white. It's a million shades of gray. Do I think we over-medicate? I do. Do I think we need to think before we go on medications? Yes, but what if you need medications? I think it's okay. One statistic I saw says 30% of people respond positively very quickly, 70% do not. Within roughly a year to two, 70% respond positively, 30% do not. I was reading a book by a pastor in the U.S. It was sent to me numerous times, and in it he talks about mental health, and I thought he gets it, and then he says, and it's been proven that all meds don't work anyways, and I'm like, what? Where did that ever get mentioned? So I'm on my Kindle app on my iPad, so I click the asterisks, and it says a study in the British Journal of Medicine. He doesn't even tell me to study. I have 2 studies that say Big Macs are good for you. I can give you those. This guy's saying that all meds don't work, but won't give you the study. He went on to say one of the more discouraging things I've read. He actually went on to say that if you struggle with anxiety, you were a temporary atheist. Anybody here a book thrower? Like, if you've never read a book, by the way, I think we read books that mirror ourselves. We should read books that challenge us, even to say we disagree with that or maybe we need to change. But I would have hurled this book across the room at that moment. If he believes that I have anxiety, therefore I don't trust or don't love Jesus, he just doesn't understand anxiety. I was on my iPad, so I kind of faked through it and then held on to it. If after our 3-minute conversation on meds, you're like, Brett, I don't care what you just said. Meds are always wrong. Here's my response to you. That's okay. I think you're wrong, but that's okay. You and me can have differing opinions and still be brothers and sisters in Christ. It's a really, really important thing that we seem to be losing in society. Do you know that I have 12 emails from people who say that because I'm sitting in a chair when I'm speaking, I'm not a Christian? Let that one sink in for a second. Like, this is not even a secondary issue. Like, I don't know how low down on a totem pole me sitting in a chair is. But here's what I would say to you. If you have a differing opinion, it's okay, but you can't shame someone who makes a different decision than you. David Murray, in his book, Christians Get Depressed Too, which is a really great book. By the way, every book in this whole talk I've listed for you on a blog. John Lockley in it says, being depressed is bad enough in itself, but being a depressed Christian is worse. And being a depressed Christian in a church full of people who do not understand depression is like a little taste of hell. What a horrible quote. There's a view sometimes in the church, which is this: Christians don't deal with this kind of thing. If it's true, it's not. But if it's true, it means one of 2 things. One, the Christian struggling with depression is not truly struggling with depression or anxiety or whatever. Or B, it means the Christian struggling with whatever is not truly a Christian. If it's false, which it is, what kind of extra and unnecessary pain and guilt do we heap upon an already darkened mind and a broken heart? And I think clearly we would call that religious abuse. The Psalms treat depression more realistically than many of today's popular books on Christianity and psychology. David and other psalmists often found themselves deeply depressed for various reasons, though. They never apologized for what they were feeling, and they never called it a sin. It was just a legitimate part of their relationship with God, and they interacted with God through the context of their depression. And throughout the Bible, we see it. The one that's interesting always is Paul. Paul had, if you remember reading, the thorn in his side. But what's interesting, if you read books on cancer, Paul has cancer. You read books on anxiety, Paul has anxiety. They've taken Paul's thorn in his side and said he has things. Now, do you know what we know about Paul's thorn in his side? Nothing. We know nothing. We know he had it. We know he wanted it to be taken away. And from what we know in Scripture, it wasn't. Now, I have no problem saying, well, I respect Paul. Paul has something he wanted to be taken away. Like, I would love my anxiety to be taken away, but if he can keep doing what he's doing, maybe I can keep doing what I'm doing. That's fine. But you can't just say Paul has whatever. So 2 questions. Is there hope and is there healing? Now, is there hope is very easy. Yes. Is that not the basis of the Gospels we believe in? Hope, healing, redemption, rescue, wholeness, restoration, you name it. Now, there's 2 sides of a coin here, though. This isn't talking about hope in the eternal either. Do people like me who struggle have hope for today? Like, do I have hope that I'm going to sleep through the night tonight? 1 to 100, I have 0. I haven't slept through the night for 2,700 nights. Until I'm only waking up 3 times a night. That would be my I hope for tonight. 4 times a night. But 0, it's just too far away. My wife always says she hopes for me. My counselor wants to give me hope for hope. Well, is there healing? I was at one church and I said, this is an interesting one. And a man shouted out, there's passion with these conversations, and I get that. And he said, don't you think when you're dead and in heaven you'll be healed? And I'm like, oh, sorry, I didn't think we were talking about, yes. But no one's ever asked me that. No one's ever walked up and said, Brett, this is my daughter, she has anxiety. When she's dead, will she be better? What are they asking? People come up and say, Brett, this is my daughter. We're having a hard time. Will she be better before Christmas, before next year, before whenever? If I had to summarize 24 years as a speaker, think of a Pac-Man. If you're like, what's Pac-Man? A pizza with one piece taken out. The majority are people who say this: I went through a journey. And I think all of you go through journeys. I unveiled this talk, I actually unveiled also my talk on pornography at it was a seniors trailer park, Christian trailer park. And it was fascinating, the lineup of people in their 70s, 80s, and 90s who just kept saying, do you got 2 minutes? Let me tell you my journey. 1 month, 5 months, 8 months, 10 years, 12 years, journeys. And the idea is that you come back to a wholeness, but I would always say a different wholeness, meaning things change us as people. I will never be the same Brett that I was before. I'm changed forever. And a lot of that's for the good. Then there's the mouth of the Pac-Man, the piece of pizza. Most of these people are people who say this: I'm not who I was, but I'm not yet who I want to be. I am not at home, right? I'm not better, but I'm also not, like I'm not the guy who was sitting at home for 5 months. I'm speaking and I'm working, but I still struggle and I still have anxiety. And then there's the sliver. And the sliver are, if you've ever taken a mental health first aid course, which I would encourage everyone to, you will find that there are mental health conditions that if you have, you will most likely have it for the rest of your life. And if you do, this is where we become the church, and we love you, and we surround you, and we support you, and we are here for you. And I always say that with one caveat: unless we get miraculously healed, because we still pray. We still pray, and I once had 20,000 people praying for me, and I didn't get better, and God is still God, and I'm still not. So what are the first steps you do? So I remember I didn't want to give people chaos, so I printed off every email I've ever got. I put them all over my wall and my floor, and I'm like, God, help me find a process. I'm very logistical. And so all the emails said very similar things. They said that they talked to somebody, and then they, got some kind of help. Well, I'm like, well, who did they talk to? Because if everybody said the same person, pastor, then you do that. But they said pastor, leader, youth worker, mom, dad, aunt, uncle, cousin, like it was everybody, and then people threw in Father, Son, and Spirit as well. And I'm like, great, everybody in heaven and earth is who you talk to. But if everyone did the same thing to get help, this makes it easy for us. If everyone just drank those healthy milkshakes and we're better, we all just point to that. One of the first people who wrote in said, I forget if it was first or second, one said Jesus and one said MRI. And I'm like, those are very different things. And then I filled 12 pages of different things. And I'm like, I'm not going to tell you tonight after or today after we're done, talk to everyone around you, get their suggestions, and then go do all of them. I'm not doing it. So I lay back on the ground. I'm alone in my room, and I'm like, I quit. And I look to my left, and one of the emails says Jesus, and one says Holy Spirit. And I kind of pushed them together. And I sat up, and I'm like, I'm going to put things in piles. Maybe I can find piles. And I did. Now let me just say this. This is my open hand. This means not changing. This means change anything you like. By the way, with any of this presentation today, if you think there's better quotes, better thoughts, better ideas, let me know, because I'm always open to change what I do. But I found piles of the body, piles of the mind, and piles of the soul. My psychologist once said to me, to facilitate healing, we must divide up the indivisible. I'm like, what a fascinating quote. As I'm looking at this, I'm reading a book by Rick Warren. Rick Warren's church, Saddleback, whether you like him or not, he is the leading church in the world on mental health and Christianity. His church uses 7 things. First 3, body, mind, and soul in a different order. And I'm like, I'm going to use 7, because 7's better than 3. And then I pictured my grade 4 daughter, Zoe, at the time, out with one of her friends, and her friend says she has anxiety, and she's like spiritual, emotional, relational, and I'm like, she's not going to say vocation. I'm like, you know what? I'm going back to body, mind, and soul. I like it. It's simple. It's clean. This, by the way, has been the mandate of every church I've ever attended in my entire life, meeting the physical, spiritual, and emotional needs of our community. To me, it's simple. So I think people are going to love this. Based on 1 Thessalonians 5:23 in my kind of perspective, and may your spirit and soul and body be preserved complete. And then there's a mind. We all have one. Will, thinking, choices, beliefs, attitudes, feelings. And so I go to my first talk, and a guy at the end says, Brett, 1 Thessalonians says soul and spirit. Why did you throw away the spirit? I'm like, wow, that sounds really horrible, throwing away the spirit. And I looked at him and I said, Masters of Divinity major? And he said, yeah. I said, tripartite theology debate? He said, do you know that? And I'm like, no. I read an article. I stopped. It was actually a thesis, and I stopped. It was so confusing. And I looked around, and everyone just looked like deer in the headlights. I said, does anyone know what we're talking about? There was nothing. I'm like, you know what? Forget it. Body, mind, soul, and spirit. We can change it. I don't like it as much. I go to my next talk. Right near the end, the guy puts up his hand. He says, I'm so angry with you right now. I'm I'm like, why? And he says, why is Jesus last? This took me a second, and I'm like, wait a second. You think this is like, do this, and if this doesn't work, do that, and if all else fails, that. And he says, he's thinking that's Jesus. And I said, that's not, this is like 3 circles. We are different things. Anyone get the flu last year or bronchitis or you get sick? Guess what? Your body is bad. You're at home doing nothing. You're also not writing amazing blogs or reading great books. You are also not having an amazing devotional time. Everything affects everything. And I said to this guy, can I ask you a question? He said, sure. I said, do you think if someone takes insulin for diabetes that Jesus is up in heaven saying, oh no, I'm last? He said, I don't know. Can we debate better as a side note? And so I'm like, you know what? Fine. Soul and spirit, Jesus is now first. And now I'm like, I don't like this. It just is different than I like the analogy. I go to my 3rd talk, and a guy puts up his hand, and he says to me, I'm so angry with you. And I'm like, why is everyone always angry with me? And he actually said out loud, Brett, why isn't Jesus bigger? And I'm like, I quit. Fine. Bigger Jesus, smaller mind, smaller body. Now, this becomes funny because we realize we're arguing 2 different things. One person's arguing a theological construct. I am not. I am arguing, what do you do today when someone walks up to you and says, my hand's shaking and I don't know what to do? We're arguing different things. Your issue might be physical. Go see a doctor. Your issue might be emotional, mental, psychological. Go see a counselor. And I say your issue might be spiritual, but I think a better way to say it is that our faith sustains us in these journeys. Here's an interesting question. Do Christians have less struggles with mental health? I was asked this at a talk, and so I'm like, no, but I'm going to research it. So I go home, I think the answer is no, and I was wrong. The answer was yes. Now, it's not what you think. It's not like someone from town comes to your church, they meet Jesus, and all their mental health is gone. The idea is that due to our religiosity, which is interesting because that's a very negative word in church often, but our religiosity is the things that we do. We're always saying it's a faith in Jesus. It's not just, that you're in church or doing things, but it's in the things we do that people have less mental health. It's Sunday morning. You're here. You're with people. You came in and shook hands. You've already shaken hands and talked to people. You will finish the service and chat more. We have small groups. We have things. We have get-togethers. And that is a huge thing that decreases a lot of these things. So as we look at body, mind, and soul, please understand I'm an and person. I'm not an or person. It's not Jesus or doctors. It's Jesus and doctors. And this is a really interesting shift we have to get, body and mind and soul, because we don't know the answers. So if you are unwell, go to a doctor. Get a physical done, get blood work done. Anyone here been to a sleep specialist? Anyone at all? Oh, good. First service had nobody. It was the first time ever. Okay, I feel at home with the 5 of you who said that. You all know these pictures then. You go to a sleep clinic, they stick things all over your body, and they're like, good night, and you go to bed. So in the morning, I said to my doctor, can you fix me? And he said, no, you have fragmented sleep. There's nothing we can do. I could feel my shoulders drop, and I kind of looked down, and he said, no, look at me. And he said, this is a good thing. He says, it's a tick off that you know that this is not your issue. And I'm like, that really began to change me in my journey. One of my friends off work, similar to me, not the same time frame, he's from Alberta, went to his doctor's sleep clinic. In the morning, the doctor said, you have the worst sleep apnea I've ever seen. He put him on I call them Darth Vader machines, BiPAP, CPAP machines. He's better in 1 day. He slept for the first time in years, and he just said it just changed his life. Medicine, CAT scans, books, naturopaths, all of these things. Some of these things are just natural consequences to your unsustainable life. Somebody once said, is this biblical? How many times does the Bible use physical analogies? The running of the good race. Your body is the temple. So, 3 things. I want everyone to exercise more, and if you struggle with mental health, this is a non-negotiable that you do. Sleep more, and I want you to eat better. I'm not saying you'll never have a burger, fries, and a Coke again, but maybe change it to a burger, side salad, and a club soda. Right? Just eat better. While you're doing that, go see a counselor and get strategies and frameworks, how to deal with your emotions, things like this for me. There's things that I do. If I really wasn't well today, I would not be wearing this. I would speak in a t-shirt because if my body gets hot, which lights do when you're at the front, my body responds with anxiety and often panic. But I'm in a place today where I'm okay. Things that I've learned. If you, by the way, enjoy a bit of this conversation with psychology and psychiatry and Christianity, there's a guy named Ed Stetzer. He does ongoing research on this. It's a really great place to find some good studies. And while we're doing that, as faith-based people, we still do this. We pray, we study, we worship, we have a day off, we do all of these things. Our circumstances will never alter the character of God. God will always be God, and we are not. How about in these moments, say, Jesus, teach me, let me see you. What do you want me to learn in these moments? When I am not in a church setting, when I'm in a public school or a business setting, I just switch soul and spirit to something different. Now, we still use these terminologies. Have you ever been for a walk and someone says it's really good for my spirit? A little different, but these things are still really good for us. Volunteering, gratitude, relationships. Mindfulness is just breathing, reflection. I put up verses all over my house. The Lord is good, a stronghold in the day of trouble. He knows those who take refuge in him. You don't probably often quote Nahum, but have you ever read Nahum 1:8? But with an overflowing flood, he will make a complete end of Nineveh. You're like, oh, maybe that doesn't mean exactly what I thought it meant. I'm just saying take the Bible in context. Thomas Merton's prayer of abandonment, I paraphrase, God, I have no idea what's going on, but I trust you. The goal was to take chaos and to make it something simple. I love body, mind, and soul. My daughter comes home a few years ago. He was in grade 8. She's weeping as she walks through the door. I'm like, who did it? I'll kill him, like I'm a dad, right? And she said, no, one of my best friends is struggling with self-harm. And so we sat down, and she looks me in the eye, tears streaming down her face. And she says, you do this for a living. How do I help her? I said, do you want to know what your job is? She said, help her. I said, honey, you have one job. Do you want to know what it is? She said, help her. Strong little kid. I said, you have one job, and your job is to love her. You were in grade 8. The problem I see with many students and even adults is we are the people who people come and talk to. But I would just ask this, how many of you have a counseling, how many of you are trained as counselors or anything like that? Quick show of hands. 2, great. Everyone come talk to you 2 afterwards. Here's the problem. Only you 2 can counsel then. The Bible says give good counsel. It doesn't say give good counseling. Give good counsel, love, listen. But this is where I love body, mind, and soul. Where when it's beyond what we can do, you can say, hey, have you been to your doctor? I'll go with you. You want to go for a walk? Let's not do McDonald's. Let's go do something healthier, whatever. Like, it's just looking at that. And then, hey, I got a great counselor. Can I go with you? I know many people who go, who's so scared of a counselor, and they go with a friend, and the friend within 10 minutes just gets kind of, hey, the counselor says, do you mind if this person leaves? And then you're at the counselor. And then faith, like, we're a faith community. Make sure your pastors and your leaders know you're struggling so we can love on you and pray for you and be with you in this journey. How does our faith play a role? Do we trust God is who he says he is? That even if we struggle, like if I never get better, God is still God. And if I get better tomorrow, God is still God. I began researching suffering because I found it very hard. There's not a lot of writing on suffering that's modern. I'm reading books 300 and 400 years old. One guy wrote me 36 purposes of God in our suffering. And I said to him, are you saying God did this to me? And he's like, oh, I just Googled God and suffering, and this popped up. I read a book by Richard Winter, and I stopped my research on suffering. He says there's 5 reasons we suffer. Everything that's ever happened or will happen to you goes into this. Number 1, Genesis 3. We live in a fallen world, and we are deeply affected by it. One of my board members dropped dead of a heart attack. He was 41. His wife has lupus. He's her caregiver. Do you ever just say, God, I don't understand? Number 2, we live with the effects of others' sins. My best friend was a guy named Warren Parker growing up. Warren died he was killed by a drunk driver. We live with our own sinful nature. I worked too hard and I worked too long. I said I'd be fine, and I was wrong. Number 4 is something we don't like to address, but we can't also throw out Ephesians 6:12. That there is a spiritual realm, and we need to look at that. There's a great book by Neil Anderson called The Bondage Breaker. It's a really balanced book to have some conversation, and God's discipline and discipleship. Another thing we don't like, but there's these verses in the Bible. God tests his people to know what's in their hearts. It's good for me to be afflicted so that I might know your decrees. And you kind of go, well, what do you do with this? And I would say, for me as a Christian, my life, my ministry, my health, my all are for his kingdom, his rule, his reign, his all. But in this, it's a mix of counselors and all the different things as well. And for some of you, depending on what's happened, it might mean some of these things are more important than others. And we need to make sure that we use verses correctly. The one that I get sent the most is Romans 8:28. It's important to read the promise carefully. So I grew up in a Baptist church, and my youth group night one night was this. We had a gentleman at our church, car accident, his fault. Wife and children died. Can you imagine? Like, as a dad, I feel sick. Loses his job, streets of Toronto, dies homeless. Here's my youth group night. Romans 8:28 says, everything is good, so what is the good in that? And I'm like, I don't think that we're reading this. I'm a 15-year-old kid. I don't think we're reading this the same way. Paul does not say life will be good. People will die in car accidents, heart attacks, cancer, the list goes on. Is God still God in the devastation? Yes. Did these people only need to read their Bible more or pray more and they would have been fine? No. That's religious abuse. One of my board members, his father died of cancer 30 years ago, and when he died, the church says, you didn't read your Bible and pray enough. That's why he died. And every time this conversation happens, he weeps. I mean, the pain that comes from that. Look in the scriptures. If the people who walked with Jesus didn't live lives that were just perfect, John the Baptist was beheaded. The disciples were murdered and martyred. Jesus was murdered. How about Job? Job's family died, but Job still came back. Is God's kingdom moving towards its end in Revelation? Yes. Is it good? Oh, yes. But remember, our good and God's ultimate good are going to be different. In fact, the best translation of this verse might be, in other words, whatever your circumstances, however they happened, good or bad, God is still fighting for you and with you to bring it out for the good. And I would encourage you who've had the bad to look at how, with the help of Christ, we can take it to bring it out for the good, for the people in our churches, for the people that's in our communities. If you break your arm, we go to a doctor. If you have cancer, we go to oncologists and others. If you have a tree that falls on your car, we call a buddy with a chainsaw. If your house is burning down, we call 911. Why do we not? And we need to just give people with mental health the freedom to go down their journeys as well. And I think it's because we don't talk about it enough. So often our disagreements are just due to semantics in language. And remember that there are people whose journeys are, like one person said to me, it's like I met Jesus in the clouds, and my journey was really dark. Often I hear from people, they say this, I just don't feel God anymore in this journey. I said to my counselor once, it was one of the hardest things I've said. I took a big breath, it was months kind of in the making, and I said to her, I don't feel God anymore. She said, yep. She kept typing. I said, sorry, did you? I said, I don't feel God anymore. She says, yep. I said, look at me. I run a national ministry. I just told you I don't feel. She interrupts me and said, you're depressed, right? I said, yeah. She said, do you feel that feeling connection with your wife? No. Kids? No. Anyone? No. She said, you're fine. And I cried. It was the first time someone told me I was okay. Here's the weird part. Just so you know, if you struggle with mental health, it's like a brick wall. Like that's your feelings and then God. But you don't have a feeling in God. You have a faith in God. Faith in God is faith in the unseen, faith in the unknown. When the feelings may or may not be there, it doesn't change our faith in God. Tim Keller says faith is not primarily a function of how you feel. It's living out, trusting, and believing what truth is, despite what you feel. Many of us who struggle with mental health should not trust our feelings. And I love the quote, I think it's John Ortenberg, who says, we are known by our fruits, we're not known by our feelings. That's not strawberries and raspberries, by the way, right? It's that, are there good things that are coming from your life? So what did I need? I needed someone to listen to me, someone to sit with me. And I'm going to be honest, it is hard to sit across from someone who's struggling and not become Job's friends. So I'm going to give you 2 slides. One is what I got, and what I'm going to ask you to do is never to use these things again. We all have. This is not to shame you or guilt you. I'm just saying maybe we can do it better next time. Please don't ever say everything happens for a reason. These things are easy to say, but I don't believe it's true. I don't think it's true. I don't think it's biblical. If you take everything happens for a reason too far, it becomes what's called determinism. Determinism is actually Islamic. It is not actually Christianity. Now, even if you believe everything happens for a reason, I would encourage you never to say it to someone. This is what happened when the dozens of people said it to me. I'm at home, I'm not working. They would come in, sit across from me and say, I don't know, everything happens for a reason. I would say, what reason? And they'd be like, I don't know. And then they leave. And then I sit. And do you think I'm better right now? I'm unwell. And in that moment, suddenly there's a reason that I got to figure out in all of God's sovereignty, what is that reason? God must have something amazing planned. By the way, I don't disagree with this. I'm just saying don't tell someone on their darkest day, God did this to you. Like, you're setting them down a road you might not want to. Are you still reading your Bible? I get this. Kind of like if you stop reading your Bible, God goes like, bzz, bzz. Like that's not how it works. God won't give you more than you can handle. Is not in the Bible. God won't tempt you more than you can handle is in the Bible. It's interesting how we take words and kind of translate them over. Throughout the Bible, we see people who basically say, I have more than I can handle. We've been burdened beyond, like, these are all people talking about we have more than we can handle. Why? So we lean back on God. If you need any help, let me know. This is a really easy one to change. Just give them help. It's like saying, do you want to go for coffee? Let me know when. Just say, I want to take you for coffee this week, Monday to Friday. What works? It's just changing. Don't have the unwell person have to contact you for that. Is there sin in your life? I get this one all the time, and I'm like, yeah, lots. And then they don't know what to say. Because you know that kind of the pathway. Have you tried praying? You will be okay. I just don't think we should say you will be okay, because we just don't know. We do live in a fallen world, and the idea that we'll all be okay, I don't know if it's true. Now, here's what you can say. How are you? And here's the thing that changes. How are you today? Because for those of us who struggle, I can answer today. Now, some of my favorite things are when people say this to me, haven't seen you in a while, I got 5 minutes. Give me an update on your health. I really, really like that. I was actually recently diagnosed with Lyme disease in May, so I have all this stuff to go through. And so I really love when some of my friends go, here's the time limit, but let me walk through what's going on in your life. I'm praying for you. Say this, but actually do it. It's not the saying of the prayer, it's the doing of the prayer that we want. So do you have, many people put like a list in the front of their Bible. I'm digital. I use an app called Evernote, and I have a folder called Prayer Requests. And if I was praying for you, I take your name, your phone number, and write down what's going on. Say something, say anything. I have friends and family who've never asked me how I'm doing in years, and I don't understand. Give them a hug. I'm not saying get up and give everyone creepy hugs after the service, but for the people that you trust and love, hugs are good. Sit with them. Listen to their journey. Ask, how is your struggle going? I'm speaking in Alberta. I'm at a church. I know one of the women who walks by me, and I said, hey, I'm talking to the youth pastor. She walks by. I said, hey, how's your breast cancer? She bursts out crying. Youth pastor punches me in the arm and says, you can't ask someone about their breast cancer. It's this flurry of stuff happening all in 2 seconds. She looks at him and says, he's the first person to ask me in 2 years. How? How in a church does no one say to you, how are you doing in 2 years? Youth pastor starts to cry. She's crying. I'm crying. I'm like, okay, this is too much, but let me just free you all up. Any of you can ask anyone how they're doing. I have friends who've lost spouses and children, and I often will say, you still think of Andy? And they'll start to cry. But it's good, right? We're keeping memories alive. Don't think you just forget people after they've passed. But ask. And now here's the one thing. We who struggle, or if those of us who've had a bad day, we have to also be gracious. So if someone says to me, how are you doing? And I'm having a bad day, I need to be able to say, thank you for asking me. I'm not in a place to answer that. I'll get back to you. Or just something, right? We both have to work on that. Talk about something else, and you're all looking at the word shawarma going, shawarma's healing? Yes. Darkest day of my life, remembering suicide is wanting your pain to end, not wanting your life to end. I lived on that line. Darkest day of my life, someone came and handed me a shawarma through my door. It's one of my favorite foods. And every one of you has different favorite foods. I remember taking a bite, and I remember just kind of smiling in all of my darkness and saying, there's something about food. You know what I miss most from my Baptist roots? Potluck Wednesdays. You know how it worked at my church? You got food, but they had these lines that weren't the same. So if me and my buddies were together, we were not at the end of the line. And I would sit down, it's my friend's grandmother, my buddy's little sister, my friend's father, and we ate with people. And each week I met and had conversations with people, and I loved it. But there's something about food. All I mean is if your friend's having a bad day and they really love a Big Mac, get them a Big Mac. There's something about food. And in that moment, it's the conversation and the things that we're doing. 2 Corinthians 1:3, who comforts us in all our troubles so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God. Some thoughts and we're done. Please advocate for each other. Please stand up and speak and argue and defend for the people who might not be able to defend themselves in those moments. Dr. Dan Siegel, a wonderful author, by the way, says we need to help children, and I would say young adults and teenagers and adults, all of us, understand that the clouds of our emotions can and will roll on by. For some of you, today might be a bad day. Doesn't mean tomorrow will be. And those are important things just to understand. Perry Noble, and if you know Perry's history, struggle with alcoholism, it's okay to not, and he's a pastor, by the way, it's okay to not be okay. It's just not okay to stay that way. The problem I see often today is, remember at the beginning we talked about that depression, that hole? We've made the hole our home, and we're not trying to get out of it. If one door doesn't work, choose another. If one counselor doesn't work, choose another. If one medication doesn't work, choose another. If you're a bit more my age, Bruce Cockburn used to sing many years ago, to kick at the darkness till it bleeds daylight. This is a fight. And so I challenge you to fight. I see a lot of apathy and waiting and just kind of doing nothing. And Winston Churchill once said, never, never, never give up. You can make your church a relevant, and I'd say your business, your school, whatever, a relevant, accepting place for those who struggle with mental health by doing one thing, by doing what we're doing this morning, talking about it. I have some resources and we're done. My website is just my name, brettullman.com. And for those of you at the other sites, all my books and everything are digital and you can get them online. But this is my website, brettullman.com. My social media is at the top. And I have about 320, I think, blogs on this site. If you click where it says The Talks at the top, all my talks open up. This is called The Walking Wounded. If you click on it and scroll down, the take-home button that I mentioned is there. All kinds of links and other things. If you also just go to the blog itself, I blog probably the most on mental health. I do have a YouTube channel called Navigating Everything, where I do weekly videos for parents, but I find many people actually like it, parent or not. And in that, I have at least 5 videos that are actually about mental health. Sleep tips, how to help your child during an anxiety attack. The most underused medication for mental health, it's exercise, if you can't tell by the bike. I do have all my talks digitally and physically. I have physical ones here at this location. I do have books. This is a talk I do called Media, Faith, and Culture, made for students, made for parents. Same book. Movies, music, social media, biblical worldview, spiritual disciplines, and how do we engage the world. The third one is actually my first mental health book I wrote with Adam Clark, who's a pastor in Toronto, and with a psychologist, Dr. Mary Lynn. There's 7 simple counseling sessions for people who are scared of counseling, just for you to understand what counseling is. But I wrote this before my breakdown. Reset is a free ebook on my website, and this is where I actually wrote up my breakdown. Someone said to me, I've never heard a Christian's perspective on a breakdown. And I'm like, neither have I. So I wrote my journey, and some friends and family wrote theirs. Online, I've given you every book that I've talked about today. I just have this list called Brett's Picks, and they're my favorite books on mental health. My favorite book is actually the Anxiety and Phobia Workbook. It's actually not a faith-based book. You can add the faith-based content on it, but it is this big. It's a massive workbook, and if you're struggling with sleep, turn to the chapter on sleep. If you're having to go on medications, turn to the chapter on medications. Practical, balanced conversations, checklists, and different things. Mental Health in the Church is looking at how we as churches can address it. And Troubled Minds is a pretty good book for those of us who struggle. 2 slides. My counselor one day challenged me to put this beside my bed. Great courage with great care. Some of you know you wake up and have bad days. Great courage. Get up. Go to work. Go to church. Go to school. Do what you need to do. And then great care. And here's the problem. A lot of us don't know what great care is. What is it that fills you up? Like devotions should, eating with family should, like is it painting, cooking, exercise? Like you need to know what fills you up, because I think too often we give of ourselves but don't rebuild ourselves back up. So this talk, all these emotions, all these resources, all these struggles is really overwhelming. As we conclude, I want you to slow this entire process down and kind of think, what is one thing that you could do for you, and what is one thing you could do for someone you love who struggles with this? And realize you can only do what you can do. You can eat better. You can exercise more. You can sleep better. You can change your pace of life and your overscheduling. You can then let people do what they do. Counselors, doctors, pastors, parents, leaders, the list goes on. And of course, as faith-based people, we allow God, Father, Son, and Spirit to move in this journey as well. Our goal this morning was to move you along or push you onto that path of hope and healing and redemption and rescue. And I pray it's given you the beginnings of that today. If you want to chat, I'll be back at my booth. Thank you so much for having me out. Hopefully see you soon. Bye-bye.